Hello again, it's me. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite subject, lore. Specifically the lore of my favorite piece of media on the planet. So, without further ado, let's get into the lore and story of Girls' Last Tour. Sorry about that. That's the alarm that I have go off when I hit a milestone. So I should probably get to work on a video that people will actually watch for that. Oh, I have an idea. Right, so anyways, before we start out on this 1K special... Oh wait, hold on. Sorry, I know this video has a lot of problems. I've just been informed that I'm hella late. I'm not at 1K, I'm actually at 2K. Well, all the more cause for celebration, I guess. That also means that I need to make a change to fit the channel now that we've hit this milestone. We need some more professionalism. See this default Adobe Premiere black background? Wham! Now it's actually visually appealing. As of now, that's all you're getting though. Maybe when I get to 5K, I'll get an actually good microphone. Now that that's out of the way, we can start with the meat of the video, the sexy stuff that you all came here for. Hallownest. What a game. Probably my favorite game of all time. Sorry, Rain World, I like this one more. Since we have another decade to wait before Silk Song comes out, why not talk about my previously mentioned favorite thing to talk about in regards to my favorite game? Hallownest's lore is confusing and kinda scattered. Thank God you have me to tell you all about it. Mossbag? Who's that? Somebody better at making videos than me? Impossible. We should probably get started before I stop being funny. Spoilers. In the Age of Ancients. Wait, fuck. Wrong game. Long, long ago, in a deep cave system, a bunch of bugs found a really cool lake. It was full of an odd fluid known as void. This is familiar. Anyways, with the power of this void, the ancient civilization started to make constructs out of this void and formed a sort of society around their lake. They used the black stone of the area surrounding it to form buildings. When really weird architectural shenanigans ensued, they formed black eggs and black statues that could hold a certain energy known as soul, which animates the bodies of the living. Then they died. That's all we get to know about them. An unknown amount of time later, a bunch of wild bugs moved into the spot on top of this old civilization. During this point in the history, this spot became sort of like a center point for the higher beings that apparently punctuate the world of Hollow Knight. What are higher beings? Good fucking question. Apparently they're beings that have the power to manipulate lesser beings, which presumably entails everything that isn't a higher being, or everything below higher beings, if you can quantify that in any way besides power. As of the start of this cool little place, there were only a few higher beings about: the Radiance, the Root, Un, and the Void. Starting with Un. Un is a staple example of a higher being. Un is a giant green slug that made her way through Green Path and fell asleep somewhere in a cave. Her path through there spawned all sorts of life, and when she fell asleep, she spawned a whole race of beings known as the Mosskin. Little funny bugs covered in moss, who could have seen that coming. The Void itself is confusing, and we'll talk about it later. It's the same thing that the dudes before here were hanging out around. The Root is a female higher being that presumably existed here for a while. She's not that important yet. Last but not least would be the Radiance. The Radiance is a big-ass moth made of light and dreams who formed her own tribe, the Moth Tribe. The Moth Tribe was a peaceful civilization that worshipped the Radiance and knew how to access dreams and thoughts. Very few of them ever picked up a weapon. Basically, it was just a big fucking group of bug hippies with access to people's brains. Terrifying. On top of all this civilization, there was also a dark cave system full of spiders. This would be known as Deep Nest, a hive of arguably feral bugs that was here long before the other wild bugs showed up. So at this point in history, we have 4 groups of bugs in the area. The Mosskin in the upper left, the general bugs in the center, the spiders in the bottom left, and the bees of the hive in the bottom right, who I haven't mentioned yet, but they're not really important, so who cares? Oh yeah, also, there was a bunch of mushrooms who gained sentience. Don't bother asking, I don't think it tells us. Anyway, it's nice and peaceful, right? What could go wrong? Here he comes, the main plot instigator. The Worm was a gargantuan higher being that burrowed its way into the kingdom's edge and promptly died. It then transformed into a new form, a sleek, sexy form that just wandered into the old lands and gave some of the main bugs sapience. Of course, doing this got him a pretty big fan club. He immediately proclaimed himself king and named the whole joint Hallownest. Immediately after doing this, he proceeded to go over to where the Root is hiding and proceeded to fuck the tree so hard it agreed to marry him. So now we have the king, who is particularly pale, the queen, who is particularly white and also a lady, and the kingdom, which is a nest that is particularly hallow. Simple, right? Next up on the Pale King's to-do list, he was to make the rest of Hallownest his bitch. He made a native tribe of mantises take over the deep nest watching duty, made peace with the Mosskin, subjugated the mushrooms, then went on to walk into the realm of the peaceful pacifist moth hippies and cuck the Radiance so hard that her entire tribe forgot about her and then died. There's actually a lot more important than I made it out to be. Next up on the list, the king then made a palace and proceeded to become a shut-in. This string of events began what can pretty cleanly be called the Golden Age of Hallownest. During the Golden Age, the Pale King built the great city of Tears, the capital of Hallownest, appointed advisors to look over it, and built transportation across the city and kingdom. They buried their dead in the resting grounds and traded with the various tribes and civilization that they made their bitch previously. Speaking of those advisors he appointed, they weren't all for the city of Tears. One was, though. His name was Lurian. We'll talk about him later. There was also a scientist appointed to study the really weird Metroid zone. But not all the advisors were of the nerd type. There were also quite a few knights, particularly 5 great knights in particular, made to hold off outside opponents, prevent inside conflict, and help control Deep Nest. These knights were Hegemel, Zemer, Drya, Isma, and Ogrim. There were even a couple of establishments outside of government control, mostly related to fighting. There was the Nailmaster tradition, which was a tradition of warriors training under a nail sage. There was also the Queen's Gardens, which was where the Queen herself decided to spend most of her time. She basically rented out property from Un, who was super asleep. Finally, there was the Colosseum of Fools, which was a fighting ring where a bunch of rich bugs watched other bugs fight each other, the winner getting money and fame. Sounds like a particularly barbaric tactic. I'm sure it'll be gone whenever we get to the thing that eventually ruined everything. Oh wait, here it comes! Oh no, the conflict, it's here! The Radiance, remember her? Big-ass moth lady made a dream? She's not fully gone yet. Turns out, the Radiance is not a very big fan of NTR hentai, and decided to well up her power after being super cucked, and refused to be forgotten, forcing her influence into the dreams of the bugs of Hallownest. Those who were overpowered would become empty husks puppeted by the Radiance. This phenomenon became known as the Infection. The Pale King noticed this and, like many kings of fiction, proceeded to piss his pants. The Infection almost fully collapsed Hallownest. Citizens were picked off, and the full goal of the kingdom became to stop the Infection. The Great Knights were disbanded, and the nobles began to do as nobles do, and became corrupt. One of these nobles began to look towards the odd ancient statues that held that odd energy. The noble probably thought to himself on his comically large, get it 'cause he's fat, rocking chair, maybe this energy could be used to prevent the infection. So he thought maybe, soul could be used to stop the plague, and he then established the Soul Sanctum. The Soul Sanctum was a school of research devoted to soul. Who could have seen that coming? Needless to say, it got corrupted. The noble, now known as the Soul Master, in search of more soul, began to harvest it en masse from the poor folks. Some of his students imbibed too much soul and became deflated, known as mistakes and follies. The king saw this and shut it all down. The master, in turn, didn't take this all too well. We'll catch back up on him later when we get to the endgame events. However, this is only one of the aspects of the kingdom that got fucked up when the infection showed up. Parts of Hallownest became overrun with husks, which are corpses animated by the infection, and soon enough the Pale King had to find a solution. He did so by going down to the Abyss, where the old civilization had lived and died and where the Void currently sits, still in lake form. He found the Void and thought that, maybe I could do something with this. So he proceeded to go home and fuck his wife. You know, as we all do. He then took the kid that came out of that and dunked him in the goop, like Achilles in the river Styx. The entity that resulted from this is called a shade, or a soul trapped in a body of void. He then placed this entity into a shell and called it a vessel. The purpose of this was to create an entity which could contain the radiance. That's why they're called vessels. Vessels were designed to be empty, but the first one wasn't, so the king tried again, and again, and again. He made a fuckload of vessels. He was looking for a void construct that was well and truly empty. Hundreds of vessels were trained, failed, and were set aside. The main training ground appeared to be the White Palace. Of course, this palace had a lot more saw blades in it than most in our world do. The king also experimented with a few other types of beings made from void, but none were truly empty enough to contain the radiance, until one vessel came out just right. This truly empty being became the hope of Hallownest, the true Hollow Knight. Yeah, wow, name drop. Anyway, once the Hollow Knight was found, the Pale King then decided to do the best possible parenting thing, and lead all of his failed vessel children down to observe their birthplace. Up close. Almost all the vessels were tossed into the abyss, their shells usually cracked on the way down, letting the shades out, their uncontained feral forms made of pure void. The abyss was then sealed, left so only the king or somebody bearing his mark could open it up. While the Hollow Knight grew, the Pale King needed to find a way to properly ensure that the Radiants wouldn't get out and nobody would interrupt, so he went on a side quest to gain seals for the temple door. This would be found in the form of dreamers, entities whose continued dream acts as a seal. Don't ask me how, it doesn't make sense, magic shit. The king sent out like a petition or something and got 2 responses. The first was his loyal watcher, Lurian, and the second was that researcher I mentioned earlier who looked at the Metroid things, named Monomon. But this wouldn't be enough, he needed at least 3, so he turned his attention to Deep Nest, which is weird considering the fact that they were regularly killing his citizens. He brought all of his sexy down to the hidden village and then proceeded to fuck the shit out of their monarch, known as Hera the Beast. In response to getting railed so hard she gave the Stagways a run for their money, she decided to allow herself to become a dreamer. However, before she fell into eternal slumber, she popped out a young spider, known as Hornet, which is kinda odd. Hornet was then adopted by the Queen, as in the root. Hornet has a lot of history, but it's not all that important to the basic main lore synopsis. Anyway, once the Hollow Knight was fully grown and the Dreamers were procured, the young dude was implanted with the Radiance somehow and was shoved into the Black Egg Temple after being bound and chained. However, as you can guess, things went very wrong, and the Radiance began to leak out of the Hollow Knight, primarily due to the fact that all the parenting the Pale King did to the young vessel sort of spoiled his hollowness a tad. This is known in lore as the idea instilled, but is known in real life as a personality. With the Radiance leaking out, more bugs began to get infected, and the Pale King falsely concluded that all this shit was somebody else's problem. He cooped himself up in the White Palace and did something that is not disclosed by the lore. The thing he did sort of locked him and all of his creations and servants in a dream realm. It's unclear what happened to this dream world, but eventually the Pale King bit the dust and his servants were transformed into some weird fucking spirit energy that still believes that their king is alive and kicking. Outside of this weird pocket dimension dream world business, the citizens had just been abandoned by their king, and everything properly went to shit this time, as if it wasn't bad enough. The City of Tears was first, the city guards now mostly infected. Most of the nobles that they previously guarded also ran out of food, and began to cannibalize each other. The Stagways went silent, and the Colosseum of Fools went fine. Wait, they're still doing that? Hasn't society collapsed? Well, most of society has. A few settlements are fine. The Mantises in the Mushroom Zone are fine, somehow, except that one dude that decided that he had a mega hard-on for Moth Mommy. Apparently all it takes for a bug to resist the infection is to just say no to the Radiance, so I guess the Kingdom of Hallownest is just very polite. Oh yeah, also those bees are fine, and so are a large portion of the surface bugs. Wait, have I mentioned the surface bugs? I haven't I? The surface bugs are a small group of bugs living in a small town called Dirtmouth on top of the mostly underground kingdom. As the kingdom began to spiral downwards, the Hollow Knight rested in its containment, and more adventurers came and went, going down to the kingdom and getting infected or dying. However, one of the vessels trapped down in the abyss escaped, somehow, and would make his way into Hallownest. Cool, we finally get to the game events. Jesus Christ, it always takes so long. Anyway, we're only about halfway done, so let's get going. So this vessel, you know, the one that escaped the abyss without any probable lore cause, for naivety's sake, let's call him the Knight, walks into Hallownest after getting psionically beamed some poetry from Monomon in her sleep, and falls into King's Pass, a cave network leading from the wilds into Hallownest. He travels through the area, learning how to attack, jump, and focus soul, which apparently he can gather by attacking creatures. I guess that explains how that fat ass got so much of it. Once the Knight leaves King's Pass, he stumbles upon Dirtmouth, a quiet, mostly dead town with only 3 or so members. The Elder there tells you not to go down, that many people have died, and that you will as well. Of course, the Knight's eyes are as blank as they come, so I doubt anything complex like self-preservation is going through that head of his. Without a second thought, the little man jumps down into a well, and into the Forgotten Crossroads, which was arguably the center of the kingdom, and a junction for a whole lot of important areas and civilizations. Now the area is mostly overrun with wildlife, as creatures of all kinds buzz about and make their home there. It is also filled with the shambling corpses of former citizens and warriors, puppeted by the Radiance. Aw, life finds a way. The head of this area is the False Knight, which is definitely not a maggot puppeting a massive suit of armor. The suit of armor is actually the armor of the mighty Hegemel, previously one of the Great Knights, now maybe dead? We don't really know. One way or another, Hegemel had the key to the City of Tears on him when he was armor-napped. I wonder if we'll see the big guy in silk song stuck at the bottom of a well in Farloom or something. One way or another, the Knight gets some cool drugs from a hippie that allows him to fire a giant soul Hadouken, and goes to Green Path, the original spot where did her thing. The Mosskin are now all infected, and a particular spider now skitters through the underbrush. Yeah, it's Hornet. You fight her and leave with a new cloak, presumably having gained at least a little of her respect. On to Fungal. Fungal Waste is inhabited by fungi! Wow, who could have guessed? The mushrooms in Hallownest speak in weird backwards language and have a canon hive mind, so that's interesting. At the bottom of the waste are the mantises, that previously mentioned tribe of cool anime ninja bugs that fought off the infection by just saying no to it. You fight their lords and are given access to a vault, which you rob and move on to the City of Tears. The City of Tears is about as beautiful as ever, but significantly more lonely. It's my favorite area in the game for a reason. The knight spends his time in the city learning lore, killing civilians, and making his way up to the swollen gamer at the top of the city, the Soul Master, who has been infected. Wow, great work. All that soul junk sure did stop the infection after all. That's a joke. I love this character. His hubris and desire for mortality characterizes him quite well, and mixes well with his spite for the monarch that took it all away from him. But this isn't a gush about Hollow Knight side characters video. This is a lore video, so let's keep going. The knight learns about how to ground pound from the big man and goes over to Crystal Peak with that power. Crystal Peaks was the area where miners used to mine Hallownest's main form of light and power, singing crystals. Not much else is known about them besides the fact that they're parasitic. We're also going to ignore Mila because she makes my heart hurt. Resting Grounds is next, an area reached by going down a big pit. At first, the Resting Grounds seems to be about as dead as the bodies under its gravestones, but after getting cum-zoned by the Dreamers and getting the Dream Nail in order to escape it, the area is alive with the spirits of those that once rested there. The Resting Grounds are also the home to the last living member of the Moth tribe, known as Seer, who teaches the vessel how to access the mind. The next step is to wake up all the senior citizens around the area. Each dreamer sits in a different part of the kingdom. Lurian the Watcher rests in the City of Tears, Hera the Beast rests in the deepest part of Deepnest, and Monomon the Teacher rests in her archives in Fog Canyon. But before we talk about Lurian, let's take a detour down to the ancient basin. To get there, we must first travel through the other side of City of Tears, which, merely by going through it, shows a pretty clear class divide in Hallownest society. Going down a hole, we get to the ancient basin, a dark, quiet place filled with near-lifeless entities known as shadow creepers. This area holds both the entrance to the abyss and the spot where the White Palace once stood. It also holds a vessel having a particularly bad day. This vessel, or more accurately the shell of a vessel, broke while attempting to contain the radiance, was left behind, now being filled with the infection. Despite its state, when it dies, it reaches out to its brother, the Knight, which is kinda haunting to say the least. Past it, the Knight gets an item called the Monarch Wings. The name suggests they once belonged to the Pale King himself. Cool, now we can move on to Lurian. A loyal bottom bitch for the Pale King, Lurian spent his time watching over the city from his incel tower. He was guarded by a group of beetle knights that died like a fucking while ago. When the Knight finds him, his knights have been infested with a swarm of infected flies. Lurian himself is only watched over by his infected servant and his fat stack of cash. Going into his dream, we learn that his one desire is to protect the kingdom and the memory of his king. And we beat his ass, one dreamer down. Next up on the list is Monomon. But before we get to her, we need to go to the sewers. If you're not speedrunning, that is. The sewers are about as expected, infested with funny little gunk worms and covered in shit. Amidst the shit is our old friend Ogrim. How's it going, buddy? This guy's the best character in the game. In the midst of being unemployed, he decided to pursue his true faction, Copperphilia. Ugh, well, let's talk about how nice he is as opposed to his affinity for the scat tag. In his time off, he was never really able to get over his old job and old friends. Let's check on where the other knights are, actually. Speaking of the knights, Isma was one of them. She's a tree now. Thanks for the acid resistance, nerd. Now that we have that, the knight can go into the Monomon's archives in the frankly inexplicable Fog Canyon. I'm not even going to try with this place. On our way towards the archives, we meet with Quirrell. Have I talked about Quirrell yet? I haven't. Whoops. Quirrell was Monomon's teaching assistant for the longest time, before being forced out of the kingdom by his mentor and boss. In the wilds, he lost most of his memories. However, armed with nothing but his nail and a copy of his teacher's mask, he re-entered Hallownest for some reason. He greets you at several points in the game, before meeting you just outside the teacher's archives. Inside of the archives is Umu, a giant jellyfish, which was presumably the guardian of the archives instated by Monomon. Quirrell helps the knight to slay the giant Metroid reference before helping him once again to enter Monomon's dream. Monomon is slain, Quirrell begins to feel his age, and fucks off to the Blue Lake to probably die, we don't really know. Finally, we have Deepnest. Deepnest is a dark area made of narrow corridors filled with feral bugs and lots of spiders. On his way through, the knight encounters all types of horrid monstrosities on his way to the deepest part of Deepnest. The deepest part would be the Distant Village, a village made of hanging buildings filled with half-spiders. The biggest of these half-spiders would be Hera the Beast. You enter into her dream and kill her, and if you've spent enough time with Hornet, like I didn't in the recording of this footage, she'll be waiting for you outside to talk about how cool her mom was or something. Alright, that's the dreamers down. Now all the knight needs to do is walk over to the black egg, pop the door open, and kill his bro. The knight walks up to his bro, still chained to the ceiling, and begins to free him. With every chain broken, the big dude falls to the floor and screams with apparently a voice that he doesn't have. I know it's the Radiance, you don't have to tell me about it. The fight is brutal, with the grown vessel shambling about, somehow having lost an arm and currently controlled by the infection, but he's still mostly able to fight it. He does so by stabbing himself in the stomach over again, while Christopher Larkin really tries his best to make me cry. The old vessel finally dies, letting loose the infection for his brother to absorb, taking his place as the Hollow Knight. And that's the end of the story. Make sure to like and subscribe. God damn it, I thought I turned that off. Oh right, we still have a lot more to talk about. We can do that in like another 10 minutes of script left, not including the DLCs I haven't written about yet. Thank God I can do this cool thing called delaying this video into a two-parter. So this video is my 1K special. Next one is going to be my 2.5K special, which will probably come out around 3K, knowing my upload schedule. And that one will cover the true ending, the areas that we didn't talk about, such as the Abyss, Queen's Gardens, Kingdom Edge, all the dream bosses, as well as the DLCs. You can expect that one out in like 2 weeks or something. Oh yeah, also, thanks for all the support recently. I'm well on my way to making this a solid source of income. See you all next time.